participants for taking the time and joining us with this lecture number 4 of the Chancellor's Distinguished Lecture Series. The Chancellor's Distinguished Lecture Series is an upscale platform that identifies major issues and subjects of intellectual and empirical importance with the objective of exploring scholarly and educational questions of interest to the university community. Through the significant ideas our speakers present and the ensuing discussions their insights generate, the Chancellor's Distinguished Lecture Series contribute to zooming in on the fine-grained texture of the opportunities and challenges of our modern world. Today's lecture concerns the relationship between STEM disciplines and the disciplines of humanities, social sciences, and art. The lecture tabs on the expertise and resourcefulness of a nationally renowned scholar who brings with him his towering credentials and impressive achievements as a scholar and author, as an education person, and also as an academic administrator. Join me the honor in welcoming Professor Gunalan Nadarajan. He is the Dean and Professor at the Penny W. Stamps School of Art and Design at the University of Michigan. Professor Nadarajan comes to us with remarkable records. A sweeping description of it should include saying that he has extensive scholarly publications, many of which are translated in 16 different languages. He also has held active membership in prestigious international academies and professional associations. Professor Nadarajan also has a well-established performance in higher education, research, teaching, and academic administration. Professor Nadarajan will have the floor for 40 to 45 minutes, and then he will entertain the questions and comments that participants might want to interject with. As a matter of usual housekeeping, I'm going to ask the participants, including myself, to mute their mics in order to avoid any accidental interference of voices. Thank you, Professor Nadarajan, for accepting the invitation to provide this lecture, and the floor is yours now for 40 to 45 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ali, Professor Ali, and I would like to first thank Professor Ahmed Murad for the kind invitation, and thank the UAE University for this wonderful opportunity to speak to all of you, and thank all of you for being here today. The topic that I'm going to be speaking to, I hope would be of interest to a whole range of you, simply because it spans the whole range of disciplines that all of us care deeply about in our own fields in the university communities across the world. And it is also a very timely issue, because we are at a kind of a crossroads of sorts now. We are trying to understand how best to prepare the next generation for the kinds of challenges that they are going to face, and how can higher education institutions live up to that challenge? How can they build that next generation of students who have an understanding and an ability to respond to all the different challenges that they are going to face in the future? I will give some context to this talk. by also providing some background to how this came about. So about in 2016, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in the U.S. Convened a small group of people, about 22 people from across the country, to discuss and develop a report on what is called a consensus report, meaning that experts are brought together to look systematically at a topic and then provide a report that not everyone need to agree on, but it generally is a consensus report, meaning most people have agreed to the findings of that report. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, if for those of you who do not know, is the highest academy for thinking, and it's a kind of a think tank that is constantly at the forefront of thinking about the challenges of the future. In an average year, they prepare between 150 to 180 reports. These reports are usually prepared by experts in a particular field or fields, and they are developed with the focus on looking systematically at issues that are of importance in arts, in sciences, engineering, and medicine fields. It was very curious that in 2016, when they called this group together, this 22-member group, the group consisted of people from very different disciplines, from the arts, from humanities, from the sciences, from engineering, from medicine. And the objective of getting this diverse group of people together was really to look at what are the challenges that are facing higher education and higher education institutions as we look towards the future. How do we make sure that what we are doing in universities are preparing our students adequately for those challenges? And it was very clear from the very beginning for the national academies that the challenges needed to be multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, meaning it could not be, these challenges of higher education could not be responded to simply by looking at it from the lens of any one discipline. It needed the expertise and the combination and the collaboration of multiple disciplines. So we were convened in 2016. We worked on this report for over 2 years, and the report itself was released in May of 2018. Since the launch of the report, we have been also actively promoting the findings of the report. Many members of the committee that I served on actually have gone to different parts of the country to work with universities to share with them the findings of the report. What I am doing right now, I have done similar kinds of talks both in the United States as well as in different countries, in Austria, in Taiwan, in China, in Indonesia and Australia. And the principle behind this is not to just simply prepare this report, but to actually share these ideas so that there can be transformation and change happening at the university level across the world, not just in the United States. So I'll start my talk proper. And I'm going to share my screen now. So branches from the same tree, integrating arts and humanities with science, engineering, and medicine. So the the context for this report I just talked to you about, but I'll talk to you about why the National Academies felt that this was the time in 2016, that was the time to actually develop this report and to think systematically about these challenges. So what were they responding to? They were responding to a number of things. One was the changing nature of work. The future of work they felt was changing, and therefore the kind of skills that we need to prepare our students with for that future needed to also change. So what are these issues that they thought that were important in understanding the future of work? So one important challenge was the fact that increasingly employers were telling universities and the national academies that the students that were coming to them were not prepared sufficiently for the kinds of work that they needed done. They felt that the students were very narrow in their disciplinary focus. They were, if they were engineering students, they understood engineering, but they did not understand the full range of issues, human, social, economic, political, that needed to be played out if they had to deal with a strictly speaking engineering problem, because they realized that there was no strictly speaking engineering problem, because all problems were multifaceted and therefore required skill sets and understanding and knowledge from a variety of fields. And employers were seeing this in their work. It's also important to understand that employers as well as educational professionals were realizing that the labor market was changing in very unpredictable ways. In the 2016 World Economic Forum report, it was found that 65% of children entering primary school then will be employed in jobs that do not exist yet. Now, this is a daunting challenge. How do you prepare students and the next generation for jobs that don't exist yet? If 65% of them were going to enter into jobs that did not exist yet by the time they graduate, how do we even begin planning for this? How do we even think about this? Now, this was a daunting challenge for education institutions, and employers were also feeling that, and the national academies felt that it was something that they needed to look at. It was also clear that the global environment was changing in terms of work and opportunities. It was clear also that the kinds of skills that were required were constantly shifting. For example, the World Economic Forum report also found that the level of stability of skills that were required in any particular profession, and they looked at 12 important industries, and they found that 58% of skills needed to be changing as a result of what was going on in the field. Now, by 2022, they found that significant number of skills needed to be changed in order, meaning the people who had those skills or those skills that they had already needed to change in order for them to be competitive in those industries, those very same industries that they initially were prepared for. And another big factor was also the level at which automation was changing every industry out there. Artificial intelligence and automation was quickly changing the kinds of workers that we needed to put out there. People needed skills that were far more than just simply those routine tasks that machines and machine learning could actually replace. So all of these things combined were making employers anxious, and they were telling the National Academies of Sciences that, look, we need help to make sure that university education is actually relevant. Now, Another important thing was the challenges in higher education itself. Universities were increasingly finding that the kind of disciplinary education that had existed for almost 250 years was just not helping. More and more universities were beginning interdisciplinary programs at the intersections of engineering and humanities, or social sciences and the natural sciences. They were really finding that disciplinary education was just not supporting the kind of students that they needed to prepare for the future. They were also realizing that a kind of hyper specialization was required in some disciplines. So they were realizing that in every field was becoming so specialized that we needed a lot of specialized knowledge to prepare the students for it. But at the same time, it was also clear that universities uh, needed to continue to make those students proficient and understand that other disciplines needed to be in their mix. They needed to become able, or at least aware about other disciplines that have a bearing on the kind of work that they were doing in their own disciplines. And of course, another big challenge that the National Academies was responding to as part of the context for this report was the growing complexity of global challenges. It was becoming increasingly clear that complex problems required complex solutions, and complex solutions required very different kinds of skill sets. It needed more collaborative teams. It needed teams that required members of those teams to become either proficient or aware about other disciplines so that they could become better team players. So this was a context, the national context, the international context within which the National Academies report was being prepared. As I said, we spent 2 years on this, the 22 members. We spent multiple, every month we met every month in either in Washington, DC, or we met in other parts of the United States. We visited universities, employers. We spent 3 days in Silicon Valley meeting with industry leaders, as well as universities that were supporting the kind of industries that were functioning there. We spent significant amount of time in Boston, looking at MIT and Harvard and how they were preparing for the kinds of jobs that were developing in the larger Boston area. So we spent these 2 years both collecting information as well as preparing the report alongside. So the report, as I said earlier, was launched in May 2018 after 2 years of hard work. The report, by the way, is available as a downloadable PDF. The link I have given there. Please feel free to download it. It's an important report. It has a lot of information. In addition to the report itself, you can find links to over 200 courses and interdisciplinary programs or integrative programs that are happening across the United States. These are interesting models for how one could think about integrating humanities and the arts with sciences and engineering and medicine. So I'm going to quickly go to the key findings of the NASEM of the National Science and National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report that we prepared. Now, before I go there, I want to basically say why the report is called "Branches from the Same Tree." Branches from the Same Tree is from a quotation by Albert Einstein, who said that arts and the sciences are branches of the same tree. They, in the sense that he was saying that they issue from the same kind of interests and imperatives, curiosity, an interest in systematic inquiry, and inspiration. And all of these things are the same are the things that feed whether it's the arts or the sciences, and Einstein embodied that in his quotation. So what were some of the key findings that we made? And I want to quickly go through that. So we found that when you integrate the arts and humanities with science, technology, engineering, and math and medicine, when students were learning these things together or in a combination, we found these things to be important benefits. First, we found that students who were going through these kinds of integrated programs had improved written and oral communication skills. They were far better at communicating ideas, whether they were from the sciences or the arts and humanities. They were better able to communicate it, talk about it effectively. We found that they had better teamwork skills. They were always interested in, and they were thriving in teamwork situations. Whenever you put them in teams, they were functioning better. They were better team players, and they were more successful in teams. We also found that there was a high level of development in ethical decision making. So students who are going through these kinds of integrated programs seem to be able to understand and value ethical situations, ethically difficult situations, and make effective decisions in those situations. We also found that these students had a higher level of critical thinking and were capable of and were engaged in deeper learning. And this next one is an interesting one. We found that students who were going through integrated programs had better content mastery, meaning the content in their discipline, they had a better mastery of that as a result of participating in these kinds of integrative programs. And I need to emphasize this a little bit more. What we found was this. So a student who was learning, let's say, for example, physics and or the arts separately was doing not so well as a student who was learning physics and the arts together, meaning they understood concepts in physics and in the arts better as a result of an integrated program where they were integrating physics and arts together. So this was an important finding for us, because we were realizing, we always thought that, and most people feel that, if you want someone to understand a discipline, give them a focus on that discipline, and that's how they will master the content of that discipline. But this finding really changed our perspective about this, because we were realizing that actually you learn physics better by integrating physics with the arts, and you learn arts better by integrating physics with the arts. And this is an important finding, and something that was really important for me to emphasize here. We also found that students who were in integrated programs had better engagement. They were more engaged in the learning experience. They enjoyed the learning experience better. We also found that they had better empathy and resilience. They were very able to understand how another person felt, how another person thought, and what their perspectives were, and they were able to empathize with them. And the kinds of ideas that they had stronger resilience over a period of time. They also had an ability to apply knowledge better in real world settings. Whenever we put them, or we saw them, or we studied them in situations of real world settings and how they applied that knowledge, we found them to have, these students who had gone through integrated learning experience, better able to apply that knowledge. And finally, we found that science literacy, the ability to understand as well as to communicate about the sciences, was highly improved when students learned integratively. So just in case it might not be clear what we mean by integrated learning. So what we did was we studied a whole range of programs across the country where students were learning in an integrated way and tried to understand why these things were more effective. We found, so for example, we found a class that was taught in Arizona State University where a physics professor and a dance professor were teaching together a course about concepts in physics and how they could be better understood through dance elements. And it was a fascinating course, and students benefited from understanding physics, as well as dance students who were participating in this course were better able to understand physics concepts as well as dance differently. So we identified over 200 or so courses like that and programs, and we tried to understand what was working, why they were working, and what was working better. Now, while we understood that these kinds of integrative opportunities are interesting and important for students, we also realize that the institutional structures within which they work, meaning our universities like yours and mine, are not always the best environments for these kinds of integrative education. So we, across the board, whenever we met with institutions, whenever we met with university leaders, with faculty, with students, we constantly found that they faced challenges in integrating education for themselves. So what are some of these challenges for integrative education? So while we think it is important, while we know as a basis of the on the basis of the results of the finding and the findings of this report, while we know integrative education is important, we think there are some challenges. What are some of these challenges? University structures of disciplines, departments, and colleges. Um, all of us, not just University of Michigan, but or the UAE University. All universities are still structured around a 250-year-old structure where of disciplines. And while we have made some minor adjustments and changes, most of these disciplines and departments and colleges are still structured around particular areas. And not only are they structured around these disciplines and departments, they also are implied in, and they are structured around budget models that are specific to disciplines. Funding mechanisms are structured in order to fund those disciplines and not those that are sitting in between. We have strong institutional histories, departments and colleges and disciplines that have a long institutional history that they respect and they need to abide by. So these structures get in the way of how do we combine disciplines, because we always feel that these disciplines are being compromised. The learning experiences and the important elements that a student, we feel, needs to learn those disciplines is losing if we combine these disciplines, or if we made these interdisciplinary combinations or bridges. There are also professional expectations of disciplines that are getting in the way and are challenges to integrative education. So, for example, if someone is taking a program in biology, there are very specific evaluation criteria. Faculty in those programs are expected to be promoted and tenured based on particular processes that are specific to that discipline. Accreditation, there are very specific accreditation requirements for those disciplines. And then there's also a professional recognition. How do you get recognized in those in your field? You get recognized by those disciplines in those discipline specific areas. Again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there aren't more interdisciplinary engagements and discussions, but they are still happening within the parameters of discipline-specific departments and colleges. And that sometimes gets in the way of how do we enable our students to learn differently, learn across disciplines? Now, don't just think that it's a problem with universities and faculty like us, but it's also students. Students, when they come to the universities, they are always applying for a particular discipline. They have a preconceived idea about what their career ambitions are. Well, I'm going to I'm going to study electrical engineering. I'm going to work in the broad field of electrical engineering, not realizing that today your success in even in a narrow field like electrical engineering requires you to engage in other disciplines and be willing to explore and learn from other disciplines to be successful, because there are no, strictly speaking, electrical engineering jobs out there. And even if they are, they will quickly need to change and reorient themselves to all the different changes that are happening in the industries out there. So students have their own expectations, and they also have a disciplinary bias in how they choose disciplines and how they choose courses. And so even if we offer these integrative programs that are combining different disciplines, they don't really want to engage in these courses. While we have seen in the US at least a number of um, programs, interdisciplinary programs have been on the rise. Students still seem to be anxious about going completely into interdisciplinary programs because they still feel that they need to ground themselves in some disciplines. Now, employers are also adding to the confusion and the challenge, because they are also constantly changing their ideas about what their needs are. So they are constantly saying, well, we need specialists. We need someone we can deploy in our industry day one. But then they also say that, well, we need someone who's versatile, who is able to work in different teams, who is able to learn on the job, who is able to have multiple skill sets. Well, how do you ask for both of these, and how do you prepare for both of these needs? Um, and there's also the continuing danger of making the arts and humanities serve sciences, engineering, and medicine, because we think science, engineering, and medicine is what is the priority. And everything else, arts and humanities and social sciences, are important, but not as important for the long term future of the economy. And the labor market is going to be really about these STEM disciplines, not realizing that the combination of these things, both combining the human dimensions and the social dimensions with the more discipline specific STEM ideas, is going to be what is going to serve us well. And then there is the continuing challenge of how do we think about higher education, not just in terms of job prospects or success. While it is true that universities serve a very important role in preparing students for future opportunities and jobs, I want to go back to what I said earlier. The labor market is changing in a way that is really unpredictable. As I said before, 65% of students entering into primary school in 2016 were not likely to know exactly what fields, what kind of jobs they were going to take, because those jobs did not exist yet. So if we really want to prepare this next generation for the jobs of the future, when we know that the jobs of the future are not clear and are still unpredictable, we need to prepare them in the best way possible. We need to prepare them in ways that are flexible, versatile, and showing an ability to change and to reskill. All of these things are required, and that's where integrated education that combines the different disciplines is still going to be the key to success. And we really, at the end of the report, after 2 years of spending a lot of time learning about what's going on in universities, talking to students, countless number of students, countless number of faculty, countless number of university leaders, presidents, provosts, we came to this conclusion that integrative education is the which combines the arts and the sciences and engineering and the humanities as well as the social sciences is going to be the key. Now, while I do not know, I have not been to the UAE, and I do not know much about the educational scene there. I tried to find as much as I could about what's going on there, and to indicate what I think are some implications for the report or the findings of this report or for integrative education, for higher education in UAE. So I had a chance to look at the Ministry of Education's strategic plan from 2017 to 2021, and it's a really ambitious plan. It looks like it's an important part of how the UAE is imagining the future of its population and how it to better prepare its people for the future. So develop an innovative education system for knowledge and global competitive society that includes all age groups to meet future labor market demand by ensuring quality of the Ministry of Education outputs, provision of best services for internal and external customers. And I was particularly intrigued by strategic objective 8, establish a culture of innovation in an institutional working environment. Now, innovation happens exactly when we are willing to risk, when we are willing to set aside our existing presumptions about what we think works and why we think those work, to acknowledge that there are other things that we don't know, other things that might be useful, and that we might benefit from embracing. So I see that the UAE has invested significantly in becoming a higher education hub with the establishment of the Dubai International Academy, Academic Society City, and the Dubai Knowledge Village. And I think that in the same vein, I think it will be important to think about investments to foster more integrative, interdisciplinary education. And it might even be possible to encourage, incentivize cross-institutional, interdisciplinary integrative programs between the different universities that are in Academic City, in the Knowledge Village. I think that it might be, there is tremendous potential for greater interdisciplinary integration of the arts and humanities and sciences, to drive innovation in higher education, so as to be an engine for economic diversification, which is which seems to be an important strategic goal of the UAE. And I also think, and there is opportunity, I had a chance to look at the different departments and programs in the UAE university. And it looks like you have an interesting combination of different departments and colleges and programs that might already have the opportunity to innovate in terms of curriculum, where they could develop interdisciplinary integration just within UAE university, but also potentially with other higher education institutions in UAE, between UAE university and other institutions, because where you might not have all the expertise in disciplinary areas, you might want to combine, because that's a way to prepare for that future. So in summary, I would like to, because I would really like to spend more time fielding questions, because this is an important topic, and you are all university educators, and I presume you might have a lot of questions. So I would like to end by saying that, we who participated in drafting this report really believe that we need radical, broad, and rapid changes. Radical meaning that we need to be willing to see and entertain and risk ideas that we are not used to. It needs to be broad, meaning it needs to be wide ranging, not just make some small changes in some parts of the university and hope that everything else would change. It's not going to work if it is piecemeal, if it is small level changes. It needs to be broad, it needs to be strategic, and these changes need to happen soon. As I said earlier, we are still working around university structures, institutional structures of disciplines and departments and colleges that are at least 250 years old. We need to revisit that. We need to look at what is needed for a new university, a new kinds of universities that are better prepared and therefore better preparing our students for all the challenges that they are going to face in the future. With that, I will end, and I would like to thank you again for your kind patience in listening to me. And I would love to hear any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nadarajan, for this exquisite presentation. I'd like to underscore two lines of thoughts that you have mentioned in your presentation. First is that dealing and successfully handling the challenges of the future requires that various disciplines on the STEM side and the humanities and social sciences side join forces in order to create an interdisciplinary body of knowledge that would prepare our present generation for future challenges and opportunities. The other thing that I'm happy that I could gather from this excellent speech is that piecemeal changes or small modifications here and there without undertaking a genuine structural change is not going to do it.
Yep.
Something that everybody should avoid is making surface level pretense. That's not enough. Things will have to be genuine, and things will have to be structured in a different way from what universities have been experiencing over 200 or 2 centuries and a half. So that's not going to do it. What you need is that colleges, departments rise to the new mantle of interdisciplinary knowledge through restructuring colleges in that way. I'm glad to report to you, sir, that much of what you've said is music to the ears of many of us who have a great belief in your ideas and thoughts. And I also would like to say that I've been looking at the chatting comments while you were delivering speech. People are exchanging ideas, files. So this has already generated a good deal of discussion. One of the questions that is raised here is by Dr. Steve. He says, how to convince students of the value and meriting benefits of interdisciplinary studies?
So, fortunately for us, I think that we are finding that the demand for interdisciplinary education among our students is much more clear to them than to faculty, because faculty, we are trained in specific disciplines, and so sometimes we are more wedded to and we are more tied to that discipline than our students are. Students are still forming minds, and so they and opinions about these things, and they are a little bit more pliable, I find. But to encourage, and I see that Steve also had a question about how to convince colleagues, his colleagues in other disciplines about the value of interdisciplinarity. So I think that in both ways, the issue is how do we emphasize in our curriculum, whatever curriculum we offer, the integrative curriculum, that the learning experience is going to be richer. You learn better, and you learn in ways that are going to empower you to engage in more than one discipline. Continuing to emphasize that is going to be critical. Having dialogues with people in other disciplines, getting out of your office and walking across the corridor or walking to another building and understanding what your colleagues do in other disciplines is important. Because I think some students, not all, but some students are seeing it as a value. Many faculty at different times have expressed a frustration that they would like to do more of those things and are not able to do it because of timing, because of budgetary constraints. But actually, the value of these kinds of education is very clear to many people. We need to compel them, we need to engage them, we need to show them good examples of what could be achieved. As I said, there are over 200 different courses that we have put together in a link that you can actually go to. You can go and explore those courses through the report. And these are good examples that you can show to your colleagues, to your students, about how you can learn differently, how you can learn differently those same things that you have learned for a long time or taught for a long time.
Very good. Professor, there are two interrelated questions that I'm reading from the chat window here. They relate to the relationship between introducing interdisciplinary studies in colleges and making sure or ascertaining the readiness of employers and the market to accept graduates of this kind of education.
So we have found, as I said, when we did the report, one of the things we really wanted to do was to engage employers. So we, every time we met as a committee, we actually talked to employers. We talked to industry leaders, the Microsofts, the Googles, Facebook, all the major employers, as well as traditional employers. People who were employing in a very, very specific field. Across the board, we were hearing again and again that they were looking for people who had an ability in more than one discipline. They were looking for people who understood and were able to work with people with expertise in another discipline. So this is already clear to employers now, but jobs are slightly different. So sometimes what happens is that employers are looking for certain kinds of jobs that are the lowest level entry, right? You are just looking for people who are able to very quickly do what is required in that position. That's very different from someone who you need to grow with the organization, who will grow the organization or the industry as a result of it. Now, those kinds of employers and those kinds of jobs are still out there. And so, and increasingly when automation and artificial intelligence take away a lot of the jobs that are out there, that are doing these routine entry-level positions, we are going to be asking, employers are going to be looking for people with very different kinds of skill sets. And I think that's how you convince, that's how you engage, and that's how you convince employers. And I think that you should also engage employers in understanding what's going on in your institutions. Like Like in our school, we at the Art and Design School, I constantly have industry professionals come and visit us and share with them what we are doing and learn from them about what they are looking for. So having those engagement opportunities where you are engaging industry leaders to understand what they are looking for and where their minds are in terms of employment would be useful.
Very good, Professor. Also, I'm reading two other interesting questions. I mean, these questions seem to be getting more interesting by the minute, and I'm glad about that. These two questions are also interrelated. They are one from Dr. Ahmed Al-Murshidi, and the other one is from Dr. Mira Al-Ka'bi. Both of the questions they raise relate to, imagine a college that has heroes or people who would like to champion interdisciplinary approaches. How can they effectively communicate this tendency, this perspective to other colleges to win over people from other colleges to join in this new enterprise of going interdisciplinary? And the other thing is that how to do that without sacrificing the college's own focus or own agenda. I mean, when things get mingled and interactive, how to still retain that degree of autonomy for a college when going about interdisciplinary studies?
So the key word is engagement. Curiosity about another discipline, curiosity about another field, the work of another colleague, another faculty, what students are doing in another discipline. I think it's going to be key. Building those bridges, sometimes even going out for a cup of coffee with someone and learning more about what they are doing, seeking out to visit what their class, one of their classes, one of their studios, visit their lab. That's how it starts. You know, those micro interactions, those small opportunities to build those connections. That's how you build trust. That's how you build knowledge and understanding and empathy about each other's discipline. That's going to be key. But alongside that, you also need to come up with interesting ways of bringing value to that discipline. To say, look, you know, to just simply reach out to someone who is, let's say you are an arts faculty and you want to collaborate with someone in the natural sciences, and just going there and saying, well, can we collaborate on a program is going to be out of the blue, is not going to work. What you need to come up with is to say, hey, look, I heard about this particular program in this or so university, and what do you think about us doing something similar? Because you are pointing to a real example, you are pointing to something that has happened already in another institution. So you have less of a burden to try and convince them of the viability of an idea. So you can basically at least share that to start. And it's always important to get leadership to support this at a very early stage. And someone has asked, how does one, like a dean of a college, you know, do these things? You need to engage the leadership very early and explain to them what the value proposition of these things are. You know, and at the end of the day, this is going to make the college as a whole, the programs as a whole, better, because we are going to attract better students. We are going to be pioneering and developing curricular innovation that is going to set the yardstick or the mark in terms of where things are going. We are leading rather than following. So all of those things are good for leadership to hear. So if you're talking to your dean, if you're talking to your department head, talk to them about the value of these kinds of integrative opportunities.
Very well, Professor. I'm going to allow or give the opportunity for participants to orally ask their questions, because I can see that there are so many comments on my chat window, but with lengthy texts, and there is a question hidden somewhere there. I cannot do that. So please those participants who want to ask their questions, please make it specific and brief.
Sure.
May I start, Dr. Ali?
Yes, go ahead, please, and followed by Dr. Rehab. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Nadarajan, for this informative lecture, and thank you, Dr. Ali, for this beautiful moderation. My question will be about the employability. Are there any field studies that prove that employability of interdisciplinary graduates has scored more than their single discipline counterparts? Thank you, sir.
So unfortunately, we were not able to, in our report, find studies that have been done on higher levels of employability. But what we were able to find was consistently those skills that I listed, that are values that are developed by integrative education, were also matching perfectly with what most employers were telling, so for example, when we talk to employers, we ask them, so what are the 3 top skills that you are looking for in hiring a person? No one, without fail, and we talked to hundreds of employers, right? Not a single one said, we want someone who knows discipline-specific knowledge about this. They almost always said things like, we want someone who is a critical thinker, someone who is creative, someone who has empathy, who has an understanding of how another person thinks about issues, someone who has teamwork abilities. So if you look at what employers are looking for as skill sets, a lot of this intersect well with what integrative education is able to provide. And that's what makes us feel very confident about this. And we know also that several studies that have been done by Google actually highlights these very same sets of skills as critical for the labor force of the future.
Thank you so much for a very interesting talk. And I think what I've heard today echoes with my understanding when we're looking at the 4th Industrial Revolution, kind of sets of skills for the students. It really goes hand in hand with that. And so I would like to hear your view about what do you think of entrepreneurship as the baseline capacity for the students to kind of merge the disciplines and bring them together, but also as a way to distinguish human work from robots' work, basically in the future. And so I think you came to it from an angle of merging both disciplines. I would like to hear your take on, would entrepreneurship do that if it's introduced across disciplines?
Are you talking about entrepreneurship? Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes. Yeah.
I think that there are some, we found some interesting combinations where business schools were trying to work with the sciences or engineering and the humanities in bringing together particular kinds of courses. And one of the key words a lot of them were talking about was entrepreneurship. And so you would be happy to hear that. And it's there in the report where we talk about entrepreneurship also. Insofar as entrepreneurship is not seen as starting a business, but rather trying to look at opportunities and systematically pursuing those opportunities, trying to carve out opportunities because you see those opportunities that others don't see. Where others see a block, you see an opportunity. So insofar as that is the case, we find that integrative education, insofar as it connects these different disciplines together in a single individual, it allows them to be more successful in identifying these entrepreneurial opportunities and pursue them. They have the skills to identify it as well as to pursue it.
I promised Dr. Gerald Elvey to ask his question right after Dr. Rehab, and we're going to have that as well. Please make it brief, and because the time allowed for this lecture is up.
Yes, thank you, doctors. I have done some integrative teaching of similar to what you're describing with young children through some homeschooling co-ops. And it has made me think, how would this work in schools? If we're going to do it in universities, even better to start younger. Do you have any thoughts, experience on doing such teaching in schools?
Well, Gerald, I think that you hit it on the nail. It's if we think it is important in higher education, it needs to be. It's even more important in K to 12, in elementary school, in middle school, in high school. One of the things we felt that, and we recommended as part of the report, that we need more studies and as well as more interdisciplinary work happening at the elementary level onwards. Why? Because we think that if this requires us to change fundamentally how we learn, how we learn to prepare for the future, then it requires us to start as early as possible. Before students start thinking, this is science, this is art, this is geography, this is history. And before they make those distinctions, catching them early and allowing them and empowering them to think differently and think more broadly. You know, the Arabic word for knowledge is ilm. And ilm does not make a distinction between art and science. And it's a very important principle that I think one needs to embody. And, you know, if you go back in history, sciences and arts and engineering and other disciplines were not distinct. They were sometimes the same thing, and the pursuit of knowledge was what was critical. And I think, Gerald, if we can embody the same thing in our students as young as possible, then by the time they get to university, it'll be much easier.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I mean, the use of disciplinary approaches has been there for 250 years, and this is a long time. And as basic math tells us, you cannot indefinitely continue to take from a positive number without eventually turning it into a negative number. I mean, disciplinary knowledge, disciplinary academic programs are useful, but maybe much of its meriting value has been exhausted because of this lengthy application over 2.5 centuries. It's maybe time to experiment with courage, with the risk acceptance mentality, as you, Professor, has said, to experiment wherever it is possible and useful with interdisciplinary academic programs. And that can have very good implications for preparing generations for future challenges, as well as enrich the research agenda for scholars in universities around the world. Thank you, Professor. I don't think that there are further questions, and if there are, I mean, we don't have the time for that. I've been instructed by Professor Ahmed Murad to keep the time. Professor Rehab, you have a final remark to make.
So I wanted to thank all of you again for. I wanted to thank all of you again for. I wanted to thank all of you again for being here and for all the enthusiastic questions. I'm very happy to entertain. I have my email there if you would like to write to me about any questions that you have, things that you are doing in your own institutions. I'm very happy to help in any way. Good luck with everything you're doing, and thank you again, Professor Ali and Professor Ahmed, for hosting me in this talk.
Thank you, Professor Gunalan. Thank you very much. And we'll be in touch very soon.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks.